We're here for another episode of Clean Tech Talk. I'm Zach Shahan, CEO of CleanTechnica, and joining me today are Katie Mills, head of Zeigo Power, and Meghan McIntyre, senior energy analyst and business strategy lead at Zeigo Power. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. And could you just get a little bit of background in how you got into this field of clean tech, clean energy, and also specifically how you got into your roles at Zygo? We'll start with Katie. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zach. And thank you for having us. Great to be here with you. So I actually got into renewable energy straight out of university quite a long time ago now, Zach. I won't say how long because then you'll know how old I am. But quite a while ago, kind of ended up actually working in renewables in emerging markets, and working on kind of investment opportunities in those spaces. And that over time kind of led me into kind of technology and innovation in those areas, so that when I came back to the UK, I very much focused on the technology and software side, and have just really kind of grown around that over the last 10 years. So I actually joined Schneider Electric 4 years ago, where I came in to head up innovation and sustainability for the UK and Ireland. And then as of January this year, came kind of back to my roots really on the software side and came over to head up Zeigo Power and work with the team based in London.
Yep. And hi, just from myself, I'm Megan. So yeah, I have been at Zygo for just over 2 years now. And essentially this is the first job I've had in not only the software sector, but also the renewable sector. Came here from my master's in sustainable resources and working really to do the data analytics there and helping us to secure renewable energy for corporate buyers.
So this is a broad topic, but why is it essential for corporations right now to be taking action, switching to renewable energy? I mean, we know grids are switching, but why do corporations need to take action and switch?
So many reasons, actually, Zach. From a kind of market perspective, policy is driving these changes, as well as kind of general public sentiment, and market dynamics are kind of really moving in such a way where it is really beneficial for organizations to act now and also be seen to be acting, right? It's not just about saying you are, but actually doing. And realistically, the reason to act now is, as a society, as countries, as organizations, we really need to deal with the climate crisis that is in front of us, and address emissions that come from our economic activity and the kind of impact of our economic activity. And also just to meet goals set by governments ultimately as well for us to be good corporate citizens. And that's really what it's all about.
And yeah, just to really focus to second what Kate was saying there and focusing on that public pressure piece and making sure that, look, the consumers that industry is typically wanting to serve, they're also having more of a focus on what they're buying, what the impact to the planet is. And ultimately, what's going to happen is if you have two products that are quite interchangeable, they're going to choose the one where the company has proven that they have taken steps to reduce the emissions, not only for their own direct scope 1, scope 2 emissions, but also that supply chain piece. I'm engaging them, and we need to really appreciate that as much as there is a focus to get renewable energy at the moment, there are also challenges there. So it's that aspect of taking action now to make sure that you're also getting ahead of the curve, because there is an emerging theme that we're seeing where supply is struggling to keep up with demand. So for corporates that are really wanting to show that they're taking action here, they're meeting those CDP or RE100 commitments. They need to really get in with the supply that is currently available to show that progress that they're making. So I think the estimated shortfall for renewable capacity to reach the RE100 target in just Europe, the shortfall is about 64 gigawatt hours. So that will be a huge challenge, and that's why so many corporates are really looking to act quickly to make sure they're staying ahead of that emerging issue of supply.
Yeah, and Katie, you mentioned that you came back to software. As
Mm.
someone who's not a software engineer, I use a lot of software, I'm sure, but I don't really think about it. What role can software play to increase access to renewable energy? And more specifically, how can software help corporations find and secure renewable energy projects for power purchase agreements?
So yeah, very good question. I think one of the main roles for software is about increasing access to market through new go-to-markets, right? So whether it's a digital go-to-market, that's a really important factor around what software can do, and that the more access we have, the greater we see in uptake of renewables, the more players that can get involved in the market. So we see more kind of democratization, I think, of the renewable energy market. And then there's also the pieces around, ultimately greater transparency. Software can help always helps, we believe, drive greater transparency in markets as they begin to develop and grow. It helps to streamline processes. A lot of these processes with new markets come about by kind of circumstance more than actually by design, and which means at times they're not the most efficient. They can be quite slow, and we think really, software has a role to play in looking at these processes and breaking them down and trying to simplify and streamline as much as we possibly can with pretty standard processes. That's really where I think software has a kind of really strong role to play in the future, well, now and also in the future.
And I think it's also an element of, as these markets mature and these solutions mature, software has that flexibility where it can address the new types of buyers. So a lot of, particularly in the renewable space at the moment, it's very consultancy led. And that reason being that you need those experts to really guide you through these processes, such as a power purchase agreement or a different type of solution. So software can obviously facilitate those transactions, but as buyers become more experienced and corporates become more experienced, you're going to have more people wanting more of an independent transaction. So they may not want as much of a consultancy hold, and software still facilitates that for them. So they don't need to do the whole process manually. Then they can still perhaps have access to a consultant if required. But software, I think, is really pivotal in making sure that we continue to be able to service that consultancy offering through that, but also allowing them to mature slightly and become more experienced.
Yeah, so software as a service, or SaaS, is kind of a popular buzzword, and I was a little curious, how much is it a buzzword? How much is it really enabling something additional or something easier? And it sounds like you're already leaning into that with your what you just said about people wanting to move from working with a consultant to doing more and more stuff on their own once they get comfortable with the process. But what challenges? I mean, what can you say about that? So, just extending that discussion of how software as a service is genuinely enabling more, and what challenges are there in signing PPAs through software? I mean, it's a big thing. Like I mean, but then it reminds me of the discussion like when Amazon was like a bookseller, and it was starting to sell more stuff, and people were like, oh, who's dating myself, by the way, Katie? I mean, I feel like we're probably, you might be younger than me, but we're around the same age perhaps. But I remember he was like, oh, who's going to buy this online? Who's going to buy that online? It was like always like, oh, sure, people will buy books online, but they won't buy everything online. It's like, well, now we do buy everything online. We got comfortable with it. But even cars, but still a power plant is a big online purchase. I feel like
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
It absolutely is, right? And I think it's always really important to come back to, when you think of software, what problem are you trying to solve, right? It's not software for the sake of software, which we see a lot of in markets in many, many ways. It's actually highlighting the challenge that exists for your specific user, right? So whether it's a corporate energy buyer, whether it's a developer who's looking to sell their project, make sure you're really honing on the problem, and then figure out whether there is a true software solution to solve that problem, right? Because it's not a square peg round hole type thing, right? You've got to be super clear on that challenge and how software can address that challenge. So that's the kind of first point for me, right? Around what role can software play? Well, it needs to be super specific in the problem that it can solve. I think then the other piece around, you're totally right. These are, huge contracts, large volumes of money at stake in many, many ways, which has an element of risk associated to it. And realistically, what we're saying here is, the software that we have, it's not revolutionary. We solve the pain point that comes in a route to market, right? In kind of getting to market. There is then still a lot that happens off off software, right? Actually manually still, because it still needs people to buy into people and to trust one another in order to get those transactions done, right? So I think it's more just about making sure that software solves the pain points that it can, and work kind of alongside the people that need to be involved in these huge big negotiations and huge contracts, and with large value attached to them, and just be about yeah, I suppose kind of making sure that it's not there for the sake of it, but is actually providing value. That's all it should be.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the question, focusing on what are the challenges of a PPA and how can software address that, it's that element of it takes two to tango. So as Kate was saying, these are really long and complex deals. And we have on one side a buyer who is looking for the best way to hedge against the market. Then we have the developer who essentially needs to source financing for the project that they're looking to put into a PPA. Then you may have a consultant also helping to facilitate there. And essentially what the software is looking to do is to reduce that pain point, as Katie was saying. And it's not taking away from that, but it's making sure that both parties are able to work together and collaborate in an easier fashion, and just making it more transparent for both sides of, look, we're actually working for both of you. It's not that we're trying to service the buyer or we're trying to service the seller. It's the software is here to bring you both together and to help you mutually reach the best deal that works for both sides.
And I'm a bit curious, Zygo is the company, but it's under Schneider Electric. I mean, Schneider Electric is a huge brand, a hugely respected, brand with a lot of history. How much does it help having the Schneider Electric, name and background for helping Zygo to like make this case to people and explain, you're not just a few people in a garage in Silicon Valley who are like trying to sell a software package for buying big power plants. Like you're like, oh, we're part of Schneider Electric. I feel like this would be a huge factor for me to feel comfortable taking those first steps initially.
Absolutely. Schneider Electric is, I believe, kind of one of the largest corporate buyers of green energy in the world. They have history, they have like second to none knowledge, and the best data sets really in market because of who they are and what they do. And ultimately what that means is when you start to bring that level of expertise together with a software that's solving a pain point, you kind of got a real sweet spot, right? And you're totally right. We aren't just a small tech company. We are absolutely an element, we are a tech arm of Schneider, and we come with the might that comes with the experience and the skill sets that they have. So a lot of we're actually working with the Schneider Electric team right now to be getting to a point where all of their tenders are coming through our platform. What that allows us to do is it allows us to aggregate data, in real data actually, from the market that hasn't necessarily been aggregated before, and provide greater insights to buyers and sellers in order for them to be as successful as they can in these markets, right? And we can only do that with the might of Schneider behind us. So ultimately, I think really what it allows us to do is it allows us to provide even more value in the market, and we are ultimately better together than we kind of are apart.
Yeah. So on the data side, I mean, as they say, data is gold, and everybody wants more data these days. You also need a way to make use of that data. You need to be able to process and understand and use the data. So, what kind of data-driven insights, what kind of data platforms and kind of information processing is involved here that can help corporations negotiate PPAs and just feel like they're doing things the best possible way.
Yeah, so on that, I think to almost take a step back and say, well, what is the core value of data? And it's the same of a picture tells 1,000 words. It's the same with data when you get it in such a visual format. And it really helps you to understand what's going on in the market. How can something that we see in the news, a very recent example being the Russia-Ukraine war, how is that impacting stuff? And that is very easily displayed in pricing graphs, for example, in data. And what we can get from that is seeing those insights that we get. How do we implement that to make the best decision for your business? And if you combine that data with the software, you can then put those strategies into place to protect yourself against market volatility. And that is something that otherwise, if it wasn't through software and through these data types of insights, that would take a lot of, internal resource and time to really research and understand this. So I think that's the core value that data provides, first of all. In terms of what insights can we then give in a platform such as Zygo, what we do is we take that data, first of all, to help them tell that story, but then there's also features we can develop. So things such as feedback to people that participate in the tenders that we release, to help essentially encourage competitiveness and making sure that essentially we're getting the most competitive prices in the market, and then making sure that everyone has that full transparency of where is the market currently. And again, going back to making sure that both sides of the equation, the buyers and the sellers, are getting a fair deal. And the power of that really is in the data insights that we can tell, and removing any potential bias there really is in the numbers, and you can see it for yourselves, and using that to, like I was saying, go back to senior stakeholders and sell that story a lot stronger, I think.
Ultimately, and you said it, Zach, data for the sake of data is not useful. Right? It's what you do with that data, it's the connections that you make with that data, it's the insights that you drive from that data that we believe, kind of from a software perspective, help your business be more successful. So when we think about it from our developing community that we have on platform, it's ultimately giving them as much information about where they rank with their peers, how their offers are looking against others, what does it look like from a pricing perspective, a structure perspective, all those different data points we ultimately want to give to be able to help these organizations be more successful. Because if they're more successful, we have a much greater level of renewable energy on our grids, and that's ultimately helping to drive emissions down. So there is a kind of greater good to it too. But you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. I get really frustrated when they're like, just give us a dashboard. For what reason, right? What do you want to do with that dashboard? What's the insights that you want to gain from it? And I think, before you go into any form of software with any data, you need to be super clear in your head as to what are the insights we need to be driving, and how are we going to use those in our business to, influence what we do. And I think if you can get those things clear, then you'll use data in the right way, rather than data for the sake of data.
Yeah. So, and then how can streamlining renewable energy procurement through software translate into cost savings and increased efficiency for those corporations? Like, how does that help versus just calling up someone and making the deal, or sending emails back and forth with the contract?
So I think one of the main benefits of it is transparency, right? And we say a lot that this market is an evolving market and a maturing market, and so transparency needs to be driven, because transparency helps competition in many ways. And competition helps drive down price, it helps drive down risk. There are lots of different things that competition can do. So from my perspective, the most important thing actually is around driving that transparency in the market, whether it's pricing, whether it's whatever it is, that's really what it should be about.
Megan, anything to add? I think you're just in agreement. Yes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that essentially is it. And then just making sure the price transparency there, and the cost savings and efficiency, that going back to the flexibility of offerings software can support. Is it a full consultancy model, or is it more of a hands-off approach where you want to be self-led, and making sure that we are going forward with as the market matures as well? Software essentially can facilitate the transactions of different types of offering. And as we mature towards more of a hands-off approach, there are cost savings there as well.
Yeah, sorry. Normally, if I'm doing a 2-person interview, like, I need to ask the second person like something follow-up or something. But you've jumped in so quickly with all the other ones. I was like, I feel like Megan's got something to say, but she's not jumping in yet. But yeah, you're really good about that. So yeah, well, that's great. I think I've heard different things here about, like, pretend I'm, or maybe don't even have to pretend I'm a Luddite who's like wants to green my business, wants renewable energy, but I get overwhelmed by the idea of another software system. I'm I've had enough of apps and new software systems to learn, and I'm coming to you and I'm like, just give me like, what are the 3 reasons I really need this, instead of just doing it the old way that I'm used to. Like, give me an elevator 3-point pitch. Why do I really need a software package to buy a power plant?
Oh, you're putting us on the spot now, Zach. Let's see. So ultimately, it's about a streamlined digital route to market that offers greater transparency and greater competition, right? And all those things are, those 4 things are kind of beneficial for everyone involved on both sides. And Megan, can you do better on that?
I think that's what I would say as well, of what really can we, and it's making sure, I guess, if you're looking at what software solution do we have, how does it benefit and what problem are you solving? So it's making sure, don't find, a software solution and say, okay, now I need to find a problem that this is going to fix. It's when you're approaching software solutions to address it, you need to have the problem in mind that you want to fix. So that would be the advice I would give on that one.
Very cool. Well, you guys, a lot. You're very well versed in this field. What trends and innovations do you see emerging in this realm of software assisted renewable energy purchasing, and especially for corporations?
I think for me, it's definitely something that is already high on everyone's agenda, and there's a lot of talk about it. But the scope 3 emissions is something that's going to emerge, and what we already have within Zygo, there's a Zygo Activate offering, is it helps kind of group together the we call them sponsors, but essentially the lead person who wants to engage their supply chains, because they want to effectively report back to the commitments that they've made and show their customer base that they're tracking effectively against these commitments. And it helps to bring together all the suppliers that may be quite disengaged and create more of a community there. And it supports both parties there. So you have the supplier who can easily and readily understand what is required of them, and perhaps have the support of the person that they're eventually supplying to if they are a larger organization. And then it's very easy to then monitor and track the progress that your supply chain is making. So I think that is a trend that will continue to develop. And then as that trend develops, there also are the offerings that will begin to mature. So within our space, we're talking a lot about aggregated PPAs. The wider Schneider Electric team is very much so looking into this offering, and it's very new. It's not something that is a hugely mature market at the moment, but it will likely continue to be. And software can, of course, go alongside this to make that grouping and the grouping of the consortiums and making sure everyone has the right understanding and requirements of these already really complex deals, to make it a much more seamless situation and negotiation throughout.
So from my perspective, the software geeking me is um the biggest kind of opportunity that I see, and experts in the renewable energy market will probably absolutely want to shoot me for this, I would have thought, but it's around simplicity, right? So there is so much complexity in a lot of these things that whether it's scope 3 reduction, whether it's PPA procurement, if the role I think software really will play in the future is around how we simplify for either a buyer and seller these processes, right? And that's ultimately what software should do. It should be about making people's lives easier, not more complicated. And that's where I see kind of a much bigger opportunity and kind of trends coming down the line as to, how can we use software to simplify what are super complicated, super diverse challenges with many different stakeholders involved. Software has a real role to play in simplifying those things. I don't mean making it simple, that's a different thing, but simplifying, I think is where we're going to see things kind of move towards more and more.
And maybe just expound a little bit more on the different processes and challenges of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and just laying out more, what are those, what are scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, and the challenges for cleaning up each of them.
Yes, so the different scopes are essentially the direct emissions from your operations, and then you have scope 2 where it's more so about the heating and the more indirect emissions there. And scope 3 is of course your supply chain. So that is considered the not only the largest scope in terms of percentage of overall emissions, but also the biggest challenge because there is the least amount of control that essentially the corporate has to address it. So for scope 2 in particular, things such as the heating and the operations, PPAs are something that is very much so in their control. And then there are a range of other solutions available there, not just power purchase agreements. And then there's things such as efficiency and making sure your products are designed in a way that reduces the emissions embedded in it. So there are definitely a lot of different solutions, and it's important to look at when you're targeting each scope, what is the best solution, not only for your business, but also for the impact there. Then when looking at scope 3, that's when we loop in again, making sure we've got a grouping of your supply base and making sure that we're considering what their capabilities are, because you could have a very small supplier and it could be they can't go into a PPA, and it's just they don't have the volume requirements to go into PPA, but they can increase the efficiency of the buildings that they're operating in. So it's important when looking at the different scopes and seeing what actually is first of all within your control, but then when we go externally to more of the scope 3, what is the capability of every supplier there?
And ultimately, it goes back to that famous saying of you can't improve what you don't measure, right? And all of these scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 is around getting, your first step is getting visibility. Know what the data is telling you so that you then can think about what step you need to take after that, right? And that's where the scope 3 becomes super complicated, because obviously you've got to I think of the likes of Schneider Electric. We have something like 42,000 suppliers globally. And you got to
Just
understand everyone.
42,000.
Just
Ah,
42,000, it's a really small problem to deal with. And actually we have really bold targets around reducing 50% of our top 1,000 supplier emissions by 2025. That's a bold target, and that's not easy to do. But the first step of it is about getting visibility into what that looks like, right? So and that will take time. And there are loads of solutions out there that can help you do that in a far more simple, streamlined manner. So yeah,
then,
I think
so how does
get that view first.
the Zygo Power system is tracking these as deeply as possible for different companies in the system, and sort of trying to standardize and have all the same stats available for every potential suppliers, all potential suppliers, or
So Zygo Power in particular, so is predominantly is just focused on that kind of energy procurement piece, so around the PPA piece. And it's difficult to say like it's standardizing, because
yeah,
it's
I was
these
looking for
aren't
a different word, but I couldn't think of what it was.
yeah, like these aren't like obviously nothing standard. Unfortunately, if it was, it would be much easier. Nothing's kind of standard. But I think when we look at the main drivers behind why buyers want or need a PPA, they are very similar, right? They usually have a kind of 2025 2030 target around whether it's net zero or carbon neutral. That is usually existing. There is usually something around them either wanting to be part of RE100 or part of RE100, and obviously that's a kind of requirement to make sure that you are reducing your emissions on that. People want additionality, and additionality is something that comes from basically being able to say, because I financed this project, there is now this amount more of renewable energy on the grid, and that I'm ultimately taking. So those are all kind of, I'd say, common drivers. And Megan, you can obviously disagree with me around this because you see this a lot anyway. But I do think, as much as it's not standardized, there are absolutely common drivers that are pushing organizations to this point, which is why we're seeing the demand for PPAs go through the roof. And because also, like, 2030 is 7 years. That's not long. 7 years is not very long. Well, nearly 6 years, right? Because we're nearly at the end of 2023. And I think all of a sudden people are going, oh, I've only got 6 years to deal with this.
Yeah.
Where do I start? Well, your scope 2 is usually a pretty good place. Well, scope 1 and 2, but your scope 2 from a kind of PPA perspective is usually a pretty good place to start.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
think years ago, there was a lot of, renewable energy credits became very popular. And then it became more of a discussion. Well, how much are renewable energy credits helping to increase renewable energy production? And so more and more, I think we've gone away. We didn't really touch on that. You started to talk about it, how, it's become more clear. You need additionality. You need to be purchasing power from power plants that you're linked to, not just credits. And so I think it's valuable that we touch on that, even though it's not really the hottest debate anymore. But it is a really important one, and probably for new companies just coming into the space, they're like, why can't I just buy these credits from the utility that they offer me?
Yeah, and I think something else that is kind of a new term that we're starting to hear is not only additionality but high emissionality. So what that means is they're wanting to make sure that they're accessing a solution that might have the greatest impact. So we see in the European space, traditionally a lot of PPAs may have been done in mature markets, whereas these deals are just, they're more experienced and they get them through faster. Then you have markets that are more emerging in this space, such as Poland, which is the most carbon intensive on the grid. And we're seeing more and more buyers say, okay, we understand that it's a new market, there might be additional challenges, but we want to put the effort into the space because we want to have that impact. And say we reduced emissions in a grid that currently maybe needs an additional support to kind of get it started and let it catch up with the rest of the region, which I think is a really positive and exciting trend that we're seeing.
And like, I hate to be the optimist, Zach, right? Because I will always be that person. But we all have to get there together. This isn't a one person wins and we all have to get there in order to deal with the crisis that is in front of us. And I think we're starting to see that pressure more and more in organizations, because you know what, their people are asking them that. It's not just a business, it's not just a strategy anymore, that is coming down, or not even a strategy, I suppose a kind of marketing tool, right? Isn't that we've got a sustainability target, which is what it was for kind of many years. Like, now this is a business critical element of any strategy from a growth perspective, and I think we're kind of starting to that shift from what's it going to cost me to actually what does it cost me if I don't do this. That shift has happened, and that's a really kind of positive step in the right direction.
It seems like a very British or broader, even European phrase. I hate to be an optimist. It's like,
yeah, because us British aren't really like that, right? So
it's not,
I'm very un-British in my approach in many ways.
not looked up to. Yes, no, it's really good. It's great. I love the phrase. I'm gonna have to remember that. It's fun. Yeah, well, this has been great stuff. I guess as a concluding note, what advice would you give to corporations looking to streamline their renewable energy procurement through software? What are just the key tips or a piece of advice that you would give them?
Shall I go first, Megan? I'll go first. So for me, I think if you truly want to use a digital solution to help streamline your process, you need to be very clear going in exactly what your requirements are and what you expect to get out of this process transaction, right? Being very clear with that upfront is really important, because we've seen it where people aren't clear going into these processes, and they ultimately fall over at the end, because that level of kind of clarity and making sure everyone's objectives from both sides were clear from day one weren't there. So I would say making
sorry, just that's a
No.
really good point. I mean, it seems so basic, but it seems
It does.
so important. And I can imagine it happening at company after company, where if they come in knowing whereas they come in like, hey, can you solve this problem for us? That's not going to be a great starting point, right? It's like,
yeah, and I think being super clear on what your objectives are before you start this process and why you are doing this process is really important. And being able to be transparent and upfront during the process around that, because the more a buyer and a seller is aware of each other's motivations, the easier the negotiations become. It's when we don't have that visibility and that transparency that things ultimately end up usually going wrong further down the line, because those motivations haven't been clear from day one. So that would be my kind of main tip.
I think just bringing in the market perspective here, my tip would be to act now or to act soon. There's not really any guarantee that as these targets are approaching, and we're approaching 2030, that it's going to be easy to get something as effective as a PPA to reduce those emissions, and something that you can demonstrate the impact and trace it to your own scopes. Because ultimately the markets are changing and undergoing a huge transformation. And there are challenges that are associated with that. Going back to where we're saying there's a lot of delays in trying to get these new projects online. And what that means is the projects that are currently available are either they're going to go to market via different routes, or the first movers in the corporate space looking to enter a PPA are going to get the ones that are available. So I would say act now. It's not really something you can wait until the 11th hour to really work on, because this is somewhere where demand will continue to increase at a very fast pace. Um, so yeah, if you want to be there fast.
Yeah, great tip. I think it is, everyone wants stability and security in their decisions, and I think that has delayed a lot of action in this space for years, especially as policies are constantly changing. People are waiting for prices to come down, but I think it's been shown time and time again, the sooner the
Yeah.
better. And
And I think the price conversation is an understandable one. It was only, 3-4 years ago, prices for PPAs in Europe were a lot lower than what we're seeing. But just looking at the markets at the moment, we still have a lot of political uncertainty, not just with Russia and Ukraine, which obviously had the spike last year, but some wider uncertainties that may influence the market in a way that keeps prices high. Long-term prices are showing that they will continue to be at a high level for the remainder of the decade, and I understand that that is obviously a pill to swallow, and we all want to be much more optimistic that they will come down at a faster rate. And there's a lot of challenges there in the
except for
PPA space
Katie,
of,
she doesn't
except
want
for
to.
Katie. Katie
I'm,
hates to be an optimist. But then there's also the challenges developers are facing of, because inflation is so high, it's much more expensive to build these projects. So they need to price it in a way where they essentially break even. So as much as we would want to say, yeah, maybe prices will come down next year, it's not a high likelihood that that is what's going to happen. And it's going back to what I was saying earlier. If you don't act now, it could be that in 3-4 years' time, you go, okay, prices aren't coming down. We appreciate that now. Then all these projects are now reserved because there are so many other factors at play.
Yeah, it's great
And
points.
So,
I mean, we had the COVID pandemic, the
yeah.
economic shutdowns, the Russia-Ukraine invasion, and then I mean, you've got potentially a situation with China and Taiwan, which would be e- extremely, extremely disruptive to this sector, especially. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, I feel like we're at a kind of like, I know we're not at the easiest time in the history of the world,
Mhm.
but at the same time, while inflation is sort of getting under control and everything sort of seems to be going back to normal, it seems like, you want to jump on it now and not wait for another crisis to emerge, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Katie,
Not to end it on a sad note, but
no,
yeah,
no,
that's
of
definitely
course.
the realistic view of it.
I think it's that really important point, Zach, that if you're coming into this because you want a cheap price, you're coming in for it for the wrong reasons, right? There are multiple different factors outside of just price that should be the reasons that you are looking at a PPA, whether that's, hedging against market volatility, whether that's your sustainability requirements, whether that's the additionality, whatever it is. There has to be multiple boxes that you need to tick in order to make this successful for your business. And if it's just about price, I hate to say it, but this is going to be a really difficult one for you to do, right? Because it's not super cheap right now. There is a premium to this. And actually, Megan said it, as supply and as demand goes up and supply can't keep up, we're only going to see more of a premium. So there is a case of, kind of getting now before those prices go wherever they could potentially go in the future. And who knows what kind of volatility we could then see in markets too. So
Yeah, I think you guys have explained that quite well, that as we get closer to 2030, it's going to be a rush. You can imagine like sort of approaching the rush to purchase more renewables,
yeah.
and how that could not be. You don't want to be caught up in that rush. You don't want to be in the stampede. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot. Very interesting, fun discussion. Really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Zach.
you.
Hi, my name is Scott Cooney. I started CleanTechnica to promote clean energy and other sustainable alternatives, and for 13 years, we've been moving markets. If we had a nickel for every time someone told us they bought their first EV, solar, e-bike, or fill in the blank clean energy solution, we'd be a cable TV channel by now. But we don't get those nickels. So unfortunately, we could use your help to reach a few more people. If just 1% of our audience chipped in a few bucks a month, we could hire dozens of great journalists and promote all sorts of climate solutions. It's easy. Just go to cleantechnica.com/support and sign up with a credit card in seconds. Cancel anytime. But we'll be sending out some cool perks too, so I think you'll want to stick around. With your support, we'll keep leading the charge. Thank you so much.